from a defabricated garden shed in Rockland County, New York, USA. This is Stand Up with Pete Dominic. On today's episode, tips on hitting that club dance floor without inflaming your terrible, debilitating gout. And now, the podcast host who's got no need for such things because he has the feet of a child, Pete Dominic.
That is correct. I've got the feet are normal size. I wear 8.5 for those of you that are interested, but they're very young looking, my feet. Thank you, Pete Cover, paying such close attention for so long. And thank you, everybody, for pressing play. Thanks to everybody who reached out yesterday when I sent out the email, at least the subscribers, that I wasn't going to be posting a show for Wednesday. Thank you for your thoughtfulness. So many kind, amazing, generous people who reached out with concern. No concern needed, but I did write that I needed a mental health day. I was overwhelmed yesterday. You ever have one of those days where you got to go in and record a very upbeat, smart, thoughtful podcast, and you are distracted by all kinds of personal stuff, things on your mind, exhaustion, stress, angst about something? That was me yesterday. Thank you to Kim and Glenn, Colin, Kevin, James, Kimberly, Penelope, Desert Dude, all with your comments, thoughtfulness on Patreon. Those guys are all paid subscribers and expressing themselves to me. A lot of listeners who have my number texted me as well. Thank you to Maddie and Kimberly Kelly and Kimberly Richardson and Mark Nolte. And, of course, Vicky always checks in on me. You guys are the best. No worries. All good. Just had a tough day yesterday. But I'm back, and I'm excited to be here. I have an awesome conversation with a terrorism expert named Rita Katz, who has written a new book. It's called Saints and Soldiers, Inside Internet Age Terrorism from Syria to the Capitol Siege. And she is a fascinating woman who has had just a very challenging, tough, dramatic life, being born Jewish in Iraq and having her dad be executed when she was 6 years old, having to escape the country. She tells the story. You're not going to want to miss it. It's coming up. But yeah, I sent out an email to paid subscribers who get an email every day when the show comes in. You can listen to it there and preferably elsewhere, because I don't think I get the numbers when you listen in the Patreon app, although they've updated their player and it's pretty good. Please listen to the show on podcast or Spotify or any other podcast player, where we'll get the statistics for that, the downloads, the listens for that. But I feel like when I sent out the email and said no show tomorrow, I'm just beat. I need a mental health day. I need to go in the woods, which I did with Dr. Zatz today. We went in the woods, and it was awesome. We bring our dogs. I complained. He listened. It was great. It was great. But I feel like you should be able to call in sick to me, and I should be able to tell you to take the day off. I mean, if you're a subscriber and you pay for the podcast, you pay to support the podcast, I feel like I owe you an explanation. And so many of you were so thoughtful. So now any of those of you who reached out, if you reached out yesterday, you get to reach out to me the next time you need a day off, and I will support you for that. So standupwithpete@gmail.com. If you're one of the people whose names I just mentioned, next time you need a mental health day, you reach out to me and I will grant it to you. Because, I want to return the favor. All right, let's see. There is a hangout tonight. I'll be hosting a hangout this evening, 8 East, if you are listening on Thursday, the 13th of October. Hope to see you there. If you're not a paid subscriber, then you should sign up. You'll get an invitation in your email box. $5, as little as $5 a month. And the community continues to grow, and we have amazing people at the hangout. You don't even have to turn your camera on, and people stay for 3 hours. And it's fun, and we laugh, and we cry, and we rage, and it's amazing, and it's comfortable, and it's safe, and I would love to have you come tonight or anytime you want to. So go to standupwithpete.com right now and sign up. Yeah, and I'll see you there tonight, hopefully. 19 days until Halloween. Much more importantly, my birthday. And even more important than that, I must say. I really must say, what am I, Ed Grimley? 26 days until the midterm elections. And just in case you're wondering, there are 74 days until Christmas 2022, if we make it there. I'm happy to be on the journey along with you and having you listening. I think you're going to love my conversation with Rita Katz today, but I do want to get to a few news stories. A lot got undercovered yesterday. I'll obviously talk. I got some clips for you to give some context from legal analysis on the whole Alex Jones controversy. He, I would argue, had a rough day yesterday. You probably know a little bit about it. Talk about that in a second, but it's day 631 of the Biden administration, and the FDA yesterday authorized updated coronavirus booster shots for children as young as 5. Have you got your booster yet? Go get your booster shot. Go get your flu shot. Think I'm getting mine today or tomorrow, and I already feel late. I was supposed to have a date with Danny Mac. I don't know what happened to that, Dan. I thought we were getting our vaccinations together. Yeah, there's a lot of talk about Senate candidate John Fetterman and an NBC News interview he did. This is, of course, the guy who's running for Senate in Pennsylvania that we've got to get elected, and he had a stroke, and so he's recovering. I mean, this is such an overblown story in my mind. The guy's recovering. He'll be fine. He's a smart guy. I listened to much of his interview on MSNBC with Lawrence O'Donnell, and he sounded totally normal and fine. So people are blowing that way out of proportion. We've had plenty of people with all kinds of disabilities serving. I mean, for God's sake, Franklin Roosevelt was in a wheelchair. That stupid asshole down there in Texas is in a wheelchair. Those are disabilities. And he doesn't have a cognitive disability. And all the stroke experts NBC interviewed said he's has a great chance of recovering. He has an issue with hearing questions in interviews like that and be able to process them. So he has to read the question. I mean, it's just a ridiculous controversy that I think, maybe you don't. You can talk about that with me tonight at the Hangout or email me your arguments, standupwithpete@gmail.com if you'd like. In a new poll, 50% of voters say the Supreme Court's decision to overturn Roe v. Wade has made them more motivated to vote. Thought that was interesting from the Kaiser Family Foundation. But of course, and today there's a January 6th hearing, the final. The committee will share new video footage and internal Secret Service emails that show Trump ratcheted up the conflict at the Capitol, despite being warned of escalating violence. I'll be inviting Jay Black and Noel Kasler to join me if you want to watch that live with us. So check that out tomorrow. Hope to watch it with you. We'll probably go live on Twitter. Maybe not, but I'll definitely talk with you about it tomorrow night's Hangout. It happens, I believe, at 1 o'clock on Thursday, if you're listening on Thursday the 13th. But, of course, the big story yesterday was conspiracy theorist, racist, grifter, and very wealthy man. I read one report that he made $800,000 in a day, which definitely made me reevaluate my career choices. But anyway, yesterday was ordered to pay nearly $1 billion in damages to the families of 8 victims of the Sandy Hook shooting. Let's let NBC's Lester Holt take it away.
Good evening. Firebrand conspiracy promoter and talk show host Alex Jones today once again learned there can be a steep price to pay for false and painfully cruel claims. A Connecticut jury today putting that price at a stunning $965 million, ordering Jones, who was not in the courtroom, to pay damages to 8 families of Sandy Hook shooting victims and an FBI agent who responded to the massacre. The InfoWars host has already been found civilly liable of defamation and intentionally inflicting emotional distress on the families for his depictions of the 2012 school rampage as a hoax, a false flag, and calling the victims crisis actors. Some families testifying that they suffered harassment and violent threats as a result of the lies and argued he profited from the rhetoric. 26 people were shot and killed in the Sandy Hook attack, most of them young children. Tonight, Jones mocking the verdict.
All right, Lester, thank you very much for explaining it. My reaction to that immediately was, will he ever have to pay a dime? Will the plaintiffs, will the victims, his victims, ever see any of this money? Well, here's the answer. A whole bunch of legal analysis I've gathered to give us the answer to that. Starting with the great Harry Lippman. He's a legal affairs columnist at the LA Times, former U.S. attorney, DOJ official. You see him on MSNBC all the time. Hosts a great podcast called Talking Feds. And here he is yesterday on MSNBC with Nicole Wallace on Deadline White House, examining the consequences of this judgment.
Harry Lippman, what systems exist in the law to make sure that this massive financial penalty, which does nothing to alleviate the suffering from the loss of their kids? I'm sure all of these families, I know all these families would trade every penny to have their kids back for a minute. What exists in the law to make sure that the financial penalty is paid by Jones?
Yeah. Let's first note what exists in the law to actually give payback for lies, because we've assumed over the last many years there's nothing that can be done. We've accepted it. Just today, Trump was ordered to stand for deposition next week in a defamation suit by Carroll, and it's the same. So this does show that the law can sometimes redress the lies themselves. What can be done? It's an old sorry tale that it's one thing to get a verdict and another thing to chase it. You can attach his assets. I'm sure there will be subsequent litigation where he'll say bankruptcy, and they'll try to get forensic investigators and say he doesn't have it. But we're talking about such outsized numbers that even if he's able to bob and weave some, I just don't see how he winds up anything but basically broke now for the rest of his life. So in fact, defendants who have been held guilty often do squirm away. One of them's named Donald Trump. But there are mechanisms to attach assets. And at the end of the day, the sheriff will come and, attach the home once you can prove that he's got assets to pay. That'll be the fight. And by the way, if he doesn't have enough, everything he does have goes to them.
Wow. How about that? I was surprised to hear that analysis, but pleasantly surprised. Harry Lipman yesterday, also on MSNBC with Ari Melber, Daily Beast writer, reporter Will Sommer, who has been covering this trial from the beginning.
Will, I want to just get your bottom line take on the scale of today's punishment. Is it unprecedented?
I mean, it's enormous. I mean, it's just massive. I was watching the verdict come in today, and the first plaintiff, as people saw in the clip you played, got $120 million in his favor. And then I thought, wow, that's hefty for all the plaintiffs. And then you realize that's just one of them. And so, I mean, this is really enormous. I think, obviously, it remains to be seen how much they're going to collect of this money. There's still one more trial to go. There's the verdict in Texas already. But this, I think, is going to make it very difficult for Alex Jones and InfoWars to continue to operate.
Yeah, so just briefly on that point, based on your understanding, he's talking what he said on his show, but you think legally, if these are not narrowed or overturned, it could bankrupt his media empire?
I think it certainly could. I mean, we saw him already try to move his companies into bankruptcy as sort of legal maneuvers before this trial. There are these accusations that I think are pretty well founded that he's been kind of funneling money away to try to put it with family members. But it seems like the plaintiff's attorneys are onto that, and so that likely will not be successful. But look, I mean, this is not a small company either. I think people are saying, well, can he pay all this money? This is a company that at one point was making $800,000 a day. And so, there is a lot of money still to be mined here. And
yeah, that's who said it. Will Sommer on MSNBC. $800,000 a day. How? Jesus Christ. Oh, well, take it all from him, folks. And how do I get on the jury for his next trial? Because I'd like to award the plaintiffs the ragged edges of his vocal cords. I would like to steal his voice and just give that away so he can't use it anymore. Ugh. And here's Ben Collins on MSNBC with Hallie Jackson talking. He also covers the conspiracy beat, and here's his reaction.
Hallie, my jaw is on the floor here. This is an amount of money that he cannot make up, and he knows that, and that's what he's saying right now. He's obviously telling people to go buy some supplements or whatever, but there are no amount of supplements that are going to make up that level of money. His team counted over $1 billion. We're still that's how high the damages are here. Nobody has a real number yet. We're still trying to figure that out. I do want to read you a quote from him. He said, first of all, we've lost count. It's in the billions. And he says, why not make it trillions? Because he doesn't have any of this. And he said, this must be what hell's like. They just read out the damages, even though you don't got the money. And that's what he's going through right now, Alex Jones. He also said he's not going to stop. He said they want to scare us away from questioning Uvalde or Parkland. We're not going away. We're not going to stop.
All right. Well, one more. And you know what? I feel terrible. Rarely does this happen, but I'm looking through my history here, and I cannot find the name of this legal analyst. But I remember I really liked this one and wanted to include one more clip. So a fourth clip of legal analysis at what this means. I think it's super helpful.
These are astronomical figures. The jury was really, really angry, and we can absolutely understand why. What Alex Jones did here is just horrific. And I was wrong when you asked me a few minutes ago, will we see those hundreds of millions of dollars, more than $500 million? And I thought, no, because of how cases typically go. And I think we now know what took the jury so long. One, there's nothing typical about this, thank goodness. And two, we know the jury really parsed for every different plaintiff. There were different amounts. And we heard this read out to us. First, damages or slander, then emotional distress. Those were the two buckets of damages that we had talked about before. Now, the other thing that we need to watch for here is that these are, as I understand it, under Connecticut law, these are compensatory damages. So the punitive damages for defamation is capped in Connecticut, I believe, to the amount of attorney's fees. And you heard that part of the verdict was that the jury said, yes, that's met here, but that there can also be punitive damages with respect to that Connecticut Unfair Business Practices Act. And there will be another hearing, I understand, in a few weeks where the judge makes that determination. So I think based on Connecticut law, this might not even be the end of it. And let's be clear, Alex Jones is very, very wealthy, but a couple of things. One, this should, and I believe will, bankrupt him. And that's part of the point, I think. And I think it's the end of InfoWars. And this will really be a case study in how do you try to recover damages, that a damage award that is this high. And we will be looking at wage garnishes. We will be looking at liens. We will be looking at all different ways to try and recover every bit of these verdicts.
And I will be looking to talk with you about it at tonight's Hangout. I always love to hear from listeners and miss being live, to hear from you in the moment on these things. Still trying to find a way to make that happen. And I will. I promise you I will figure a way to go live on the show and take calls and try to do it regularly. I will figure it out. All right. So I wanted to move on to one other quick issue, which is Tucker Carlson is the most dangerous guy, I think. I mean, the Murdochs, somebody corrected me last night. The Murdochs are more dangerous, perhaps, his daddies. But even if he wasn't at Fox News, he would have his own independent platform and still probably be, I don't know, almost as influential. I think sometimes the olds have a harder time finding the internet channels and podcasts, etc. But Tucker Carlson is tied to Kanye West because he interviewed him, and obviously a lot of news coming out of Kanye West over the past week or so. And so Kanye West sat down with Tucker Carlson and he aired excerpts from the interviews, edited interviews across a couple nights on Fox News this week. And the reason I bring this up is because I think it's just really important to mention or talk about journalism. And Tucker Carlson crossed some pretty ethical lines, which is par for the course for Tucker Carlson. But here's the thing. He cut out the most outrageous anti-Semitic horrible shit. Fox News and Tucker Carlson cut those comments out. And Colby Hall has great reporting on this, or a great piece about this. Well, I should say first credit to Vice, who I think got the scoop, watching the disturbing Kanye interview clips that Tucker Carlson didn't put on the air by Anna Merlin. Vice got bigoted statements from Kanye about Jewish people, bizarre claims about fake children, as well as describing visions of kinetic energy cities sent him by God. And Tucker Carlson cut that stuff out and then tried to make him seem like a normal guy when he talked about the racial stuff, because that's what he wanted him there for. So really terrible. And that's what happens over there all the time. They can never get too old to talk about how Fox News is a complete propaganda network for anything that will get ratings at this point, with almost no lines to cross, no ethics at all, filled with cranks and conspiracy theories and hardcore misogynistic bigots every single day of the week, because it gets huge ratings, makes lots of money, as we just found out about Alex Jones. All right, well, that's all I've got for you here at the opening part of the show. I've been enjoying throwing this opening segment together, learning, getting context myself, and continuing to find my way here on the pod. But I'm always going to have these great conversations, which is exactly what I have coming up. You might think I'm not in the mood for a conversation interview with a terrorism expert, but we talk a lot about my guest, Rita Katz, life. And Val heard me editing this one. I was in the living room playing it, and she goes, "Who is that? That sounds very interesting." So I think you're really going to like this conversation. And as listener and friend Mindy Cunningham said on Twitter the other day, she's never been disappointed about after any interview that she heard here on Stand Up. That is high praise, Mindy. Thank you. But before I get to my conversation with Rita Katz, I want to tell you about our sponsor this week, Indeed.com. Because rapid growth for your business doesn't have to come with growing pains. When you have ambitious hiring goals, you need a partner to help you get there. You need Indeed. Indeed.com is the hiring platform where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. So don't spend hours and hours on multiple job sites looking for candidates with all the right skills. You're sitting there, your back is hurting. You just go to Indeed and you get it all done in one spot. You find top talent fast with Indeed's suite of powerful hiring tools like Indeed Instant Match, assessments, and virtual interviews. Hate waiting? Indeed's U.S. data shows over 80% of Indeed employers find quality candidates whose resume on Indeed matches their job description the moment they sponsor a job. Don't make your candidates jump through hoops. Indeed's virtual interview tool means there's nothing to download. Just click and talk. Indeed makes it easy to connect with your applicants. No need to install anything extra. Indeed's virtual interview tool works from your browser. And in the minute I've been talking to you, 16 hires were made on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. When you sponsor an Indeed post in the U.S., you're 3 times more likely to get a hire, according to Indeed data. And the right candidate is doing everything they can to find you right now. So if you use Indeed, you can be sure to do everything you can to find them too. So Indeed knows when you're growing your business, you have to make every dollar count. That's why when you sponsor a job, you only pay for quality applications from the resumes in our database matching your job description. So go to visit Indeed.com/standup to start hiring now. Just go to Indeed.com/standup. Indeed.com/standup. Terms and conditions apply. Cost per application. Pricing not available for everyone. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. All right. She is the founder and executive editor of the Site Intelligence Group, which tracks and analyzes extremist movements. Her decades of experience, including assisting in a wide range of governmental terrorism investigations and developing counterterrorism strategies used across the tech sector. Rita Katz is my guest today. She's the author of Terrorist Hunter, the extraordinary story of a woman who went undercover to infiltrate the radical Islamic groups operating in America. And her new book is Saints and Soldiers, Inside Internet Age Terrorism from Syria to the Capitol Siege. And in this new book, she is talking about white supremacy and neo-Nazi forums, the hateful rhetoric and constant threats of violence. Immediately, that reminded her of her work investigating and covering jihadist militants. She spent her days monitoring, but law enforcement and policymakers barely paid attention to the far right. And now, after years of attacks committed by extremists radicalized online, she investigates these origins, what their movements reveal about how to stop them. Ladies and gentlemen, you can find her on Twitter, and I hope you will, because it's the first time she's ever been on the show. The author of Saints and Soldiers, founder and director of the Site Intelligence Group, on Twitter at Rita_Katz, K-A-T-Z. Ladies and gentlemen, Rita Katz. Well, here she is, very excited to have her joining me for the first time, and I'm surprised I've never talked to her before, given everything I've learned about her and her work, and of course, Site, which I just told you about. And we're very excited, though, to have Rita Katz joining us. Hello, Rita. Nice to meet you. Thank you for joining me here virtually.
Hi. Thank you for having me. It's great.
Congratulations on the book. I guess we happen to be talking on publishing day, which I'm very excited for you about.
Yeah. Excitement. Very exciting moment.
Well, you wrote a previous book at first anonymously. So this is the first book where you slapped your name on it, I guess.
Yep.
So it's obviously a different experience. And I want to talk with you all about the book and your work, but I thought I'd let listeners know a little bit more. I was hoping you would talk a little bit about who you are and your life and how you arrived at this work. And I think, Rita, we have to start with where and when you were born, because it's pretty dramatic and awful what your family went through. And I'd love to share that first, if you don't mind.
Sure. Absolutely. My pleasure. You're right. I was born in Iraq many years ago, when it was long before Saddam Hussein came to power. When I was about 6, the growing of Saddam Hussein, I'm sure everybody knows who Saddam Hussein is today. The growing of Saddam Hussein's power was very much illustrated by arresting my father and a few other Jews at that time and accused him for being a spy for Israel and the United States. After his arrest, he was executed in public execution in Iraq. It was, I would say, one of the moments where Iraq was celebrating in the last decades before the war in Iraq. when I grew up, I was watching videos and photos. I was investigating that whole incident. And you just can't believe what was happening while their bodies were hanged there. People were barbecuing in the central Baghdad square and celebrating and dancing for the execution. I was one of 3 when he was executed. A few months later, my mom delivered my youngest sister.
Oh.
It was awful time. And we were put in a pretty much house arrest in Baghdad. Originally, I was born in Basra, but they moved us to Baghdad because my mom was not willing to be quiet about the execution. And she kept claiming that he wasn't a spy. Put us in a house arrest. And a few months later, when her mom came to visit us, mistakenly, when she left the house, they thought that she is actually my mom, and a car basically killed her. They thought it was my mom. And that's when my mom realized that if we're going to stay in Iraq, we're all going to have the same end.
Right.
And she managed to create an unbelievable, heroic escape for us from Iraq through the mountains in Kurdistan and eventually to Iran before the revolution, and from Iran to Israel. And that's where I started my second life. Arriving to Israel, I thought, okay, that's the end of terrorism. That's the end of bad things. That's the end of being part of where you can't speak, you can't talk, you're scared about everything. And now we arrived to Israel, and a few months later, Yom Kippur War starts, and you have alarms all over the country, living in shelters and underground for days. And then when all is over, you realize that some of your neighbors, you're never going to see them again. And that's how I grew up. Terrorism was always part of my life. Terrorism or persecutions was all part of my life. And life in Israel was never easy, but this whole war and then the uprising of the Palestinians, where you really all the time live under the impression that I myself, at least, that why was I born as a Jew? Why did I need this? I could have had much better life without having this life. And then you had the Intifada, and then the Lebanon war, and my husband had to be there spending time. And meanwhile, I had 3 kids, and all of them were boys. And the only thing I was thinking about all the time was, these kids are going to be serving just like my husband, just like me, and like my brothers, and etc. And it's not easy. And the terrorist attacks at that time continued. I'm talking about after the peace process with Yitzhak Rabin as the prime minister at that time. And things didn't get any better. To the contrary, terrorist attacks were part of our life. And that's how it was until my husband came to me one day and said, look, I got a job in the United States.
When you were a child, I just have so many questions to what you just said, but mainly about how old you were when a couple of things happened. When you made that journey out of Iraq, where you were born, how old were you then when you made that journey?
I was almost 8, 7 something, yes.
So you remember I remember
going
through the mountains?
Single moment. I remember every single moment. There are times in your life that you cannot forget. I remember everywhere we walked, how it was, how scared we were, because that escape took weeks, and we were walking day and night. We were put in trucks with chickens under the ground. So when there's inspection, they won't see us. And I documented a lot of it in my first book, Terrorist Hunter.
You were literally lying there with the chickens.
And my mom was 28 years old with a baby in her hands. And my dad was executed when he was 32 years old. It was awful.
So
for years, when I was a teenager, I couldn't think of anything else, just wanted to investigate that. I opened every library book, any magazine, any newspaper. I just really wanted to know what exactly happened there. Because my mom didn't really share with us that he was killed.
I'm sorry, did you just say how old you were when your dad was executed? I'm sorry.
I was 6.5.
You were 6, so you remember your dad?
Oh, I remember. I was his favorite.
This is a horrible story, of course, but I think that there's just a couple details that I heard you talk about that I wanted to to go back to that you didn't mention just now, which was you're born in Iraq, Jewish. Your family, your parents are Jewish. Where were they from? I mean, because I think what's most interesting about Iraq and about the kind of ethnic violence that we've seen all over the world, including the U.S., we'll talk about that with your book, is the time period. You mentioned, before Saddam, what was Iraq like in terms of sectarian issues and violence? And then you mentioned also, I think, Iran. You went there, and Iran was, always had its problem, but a wonderful country before the revolution. And then you went to Israel, and you kind of talked about that. But just the details about what changed. You're living in Iraq. Your family is you're Jewish, and until there were suspicions around your father, how were you treated by the other ethnic minorities or majorities, Arabs and Muslims?
Life was good. Life was good for many, many generations. The Jews in Iraq were the oldest Jewish community in the world, and things started changing. It was actually a culture that much of the Judaism culture was from the Iraqi community. Sadly, today, there is no more Jewish community.
Right.
Everything is gone. They all left. But for years, the Jews were happy. There was no problem. And that's why they actually thrived. My families, both sides of my mother and my father, were pretty wealthy, big houses. They could afford themselves whatever they wanted. Things have started to change after the creation of Israel in 1948. And slowly things started deteriorating. Right. Every time there was a war with the surrounding countries, and they lost the war, and Israel won more and more and took more territories, where the turning point was the 6 Days War, where the Arab countries were defeated. And so that's where we could start feeling the extreme change. And slowly that brought Saddam Hussein to power in Iraq.
And I think that's such an important time to investigate. And there's parallels, I think, throughout human history, and certainly now in the U.S. And we can talk about that. But I also know, I know there's a huge population, because my wife is from Detroit, of Iraqi Christians, Catholics specifically, who also escaped, were being persecuted. I don't know if it was around the same time or for the same issues, but certainly when Saddam came to power, and many of them moved to the U.S., specifically to Michigan. And so there's a huge community in Michigan today of Iraqi Catholics, or as they refer to themselves as Chaldeans, is my understanding, right?
Yeah, you're correctly right, Pete. Yeah. There were the Christian community, Kurdish communities were also, Saddam Hussein was going after them. Along with my father, there was one or two Christians that were executed also. So Saddam was, as we all know, he didn't care about anything and anyone. And just, mass murder. And that eventually, right now we have a different regime, but for generations, thousands, or if not hundreds of thousands of people were killed because of him. And so it was chapter in my life that you can't forget, and it stays with you forever.
I mean, I just have so many more questions that I want to ask you about that, but I do want to get to your work and obviously the book as well. But what a heart-wrenching childhood that you had. I really appreciate you sharing that with us, and anytime you're asked, I know. So you come to the U.S., and at some point, all this research and curiosity you had, and interest in and passion for these issues around terrorism, national security, etc., led you to actually becoming the founder of a very well-known and respected non-governmental agency called the Search for International Terrorist Entities, or Intelligence Group, or now known as SITE, SITE, which I've heard about and read about and talked with people that worked there for years. You actually are the director and founder of the SITE Intelligence Group. And so what led you to that? And I guess more importantly, why is SITE and similar organizations necessary? Why can't and shouldn't the government be doing the kind of work that your organization is doing? And why didn't you do this work within the U.S. or any other foreign government?
That's all those questions are great. So I'll start with the move to the United States. Mm-hmm. You wanted to know more about me. So yes. First of all, I think that this whole history that we went through is really part of me. And it builds who you are. So yes, I was upset for many years for being a Jew. And my dream, when we decided to come to the United States, which I resisted for a long time, for me, my life was in Israel. My father's will asked us to move to Israel and stay in Israel as the only safe country for Jews. And so for me, when my husband, a physician who got the job at the NIH, was a once in a lifetime opportunity for him, I refused because of all of that. But then what was happening in Israel is the terrorist attacks every day, where kids ended up basically almost in a house arrest. They couldn't go out. Schools were off, closed schools. Holidays were not holidays.
About what time period?
After the peace process. So we moved to the United States in 1997.
Got it. Okay.
So the 2 years before that, it became a nightmare.
Right.
And I agreed to move for 2 years just to try something else and to let the kids understand that life is different in other places, that there is something else. And that was the thing that really pushed me eventually to move to the United States for 2 years. And I really thought when I moved here is that, my concept about the Palestinian-Israeli struggle and other issues in the Middle East is that there's nobody's right and nobody's wrong. It's just, it's something that is happening. And what is the truth anymore? And so for me, it was, let's move and try something else. I moved here just for thinking I will be able to spend time with my kids. I was always working in Israel. And I'm just going to take it easy. But I had to find a job because money was an issue. And eventually, after looking for jobs, I saw an ad in a newspaper that was for a Middle East institution, a research institution, looking for somebody who can speak the languages, Arabic, Middle Eastern languages. And I'm like, okay, this is perfect for me. I'm going to apply.
I was wondering I'm sorry to interrupt you. I was just wondering about that because by my calculations, and maybe I should have been prepared, you must speak Arabic, Hebrew, and obviously English.
Yes.
Anything else?
No.
No. What's the Persian language?
No,
Is it
Farsi?
Farsi.
No.
Okay, so anyway, I mean, that makes anybody, certainly those three languages, Arabic, Hebrew, and English, a pretty valuable commodity, I would imagine, for any number of industries. But go ahead. Sorry, you. Yes,
correct. So I applied for this job, and not knowing much about it, it was a small counterterrorism organization in DC, and the first day of my job there immediately changed my life. It was a brochure that I came across. I really didn't know what to do. They didn't know what to do with me. It was all new, but I saw this brochure on one of the desks that I started reading, and it was a brochure of a charity that looked very nice, with kids sitting, doing their homework with backpacks on their back, and they're asking for donations. And I, at that time, needed a donation myself, but I was thinking, I wish I had money. I would have given them and helped them. But as I started reading the brochure, there was half of it was in Arabic, half of it was in English. Reading the Arabic, going back to the English, I saw that it's not a translation, that there were some differences between the text. And the differences were with the list that they listed in the English for groups that they support in Gaza and the Palestinian territories was much shorter than the Arabic list. And looking at the Arabic list, looking at the groups that were omitted, it was clear that they removed the ones that were well known to be Hamas support groups or front groups in Israel, where many of the suicide bombers and attackers come from. And so that's how I became addicted to one of these groups that was called Holy Land Foundation for Relief and Development. Today, it's designated as a terrorist entity, designated by President Bush in 2001, and where I basically started collecting all the information. I went undercover to find more and more about the organization. So I switched to become attending sermons in mosques, attending their events, recording everything in disguise, and slowly collecting information on groups and important individuals, providing it to the government, which comes basically to answer the question, why was my first book written using the word anonymous?
Yeah.
And it wasn't because I wasn't proud of the work I did there. To the contrary, I was 100% proud. But as a mother of 4, living in a country where, it's people know that I was behind so many raids, so many investigations, serving as a confidential source for the government. I don't want the glory. All I wanted is to basically describe the new threat that is happening in the United States by terrorist fronts that are using the great what would you say, advantages or things that this country gives you, for instance, raising funds as tax exempt or matching programs with organizations, including the government, and hijack all of that to collect funds for terrorist organizations. And so 20 years, I was thinking about it this weekend. I was talking to my husband, excited that the date of my new book is coming out soon. And I thought, oh my God, 20 years have passed. It feels like yesterday.
So you didn't answer though. Yeah, it's fascinating. The whole story is just great. I mean, but when you were like going in and basically conducting espionage, listening and learning in these different places, did your husband know you were doing that?
Yeah, I describe in my Terrorist Hunter book how sometimes when I told him, look, I'm going to come back tomorrow, but don't worry, if you don't hear from me, if I don't call you or something, then call this number. Because there were some events that were out of town that I had to fly to. There were conferences, there are events that, and I maybe sometimes he didn't really believe me. And so. Yes, I mean,
he thought you were having an affair for sure. Oh, I've got to go out of town. And
I mean, he trusts me very much, but it's just sometimes.
Yeah, sure.
What can you think about? Like, so, my wife is doing this. I don't think that anyone could really understand what I was doing. And I myself really didn't until I started writing the book where people said, wow, that was amazing. For me, it was just my job. Right. And so, but he was very supportive this whole way. I was pregnant with our daughter when there was a very important conference in Chicago. And it was one of these Hamas gathering conferences where people come from all over the world. And I needed to be there. My doctor didn't allow me to fly. So he had to drive me from DC to the conference in Chicago. And during that time, when you're pregnant, you don't know that, but women know. They need to stop to the bathroom every few hours or sometimes even less than hours. But we made it. He took the kids and I went to the conference and he stayed in a different place. And so. Well,
I want to spend the rest of the time not talking about your book, but your amazing marriage. Absolutely. But why not go? Weren't you recruited by government agencies, national security intel agencies, based on your knowledge and your experience and your life and your connections? Why not go work at Langley or the FBI or any other, agency? Now we have the Department of Homeland Security. We didn't then. But why create this organization site and not go and work for the government?
Look how far I got. I can do whatever I want. As a government agent, I can't. I will have to go, if I want to go to a mosque, I will have to apply to the rules and conditions and get approvals and do all of that. Where as a private citizen, you can do whatever you want. I can go on Telegram whenever I want. I can investigate any person I want, collect information and support the government. There are many government agents, but what people like us, and that was the message in my book, in my first book, is that what we can do is so much that by looking around and seeing what's happening, what is the change? I called it like every one of us in this war is a soldier after 9/11. The book was written after 9/11, how the whole infrastructure of terrorism in this country changed. And every one of us can serve to help stopping terrorism. And I didn't know what I'm saying then. Looking at what's happening today, it's so much worse.
That makes a lot of sense. I understand. And now I want to get to your new book. We're already 25 minutes in. Oh, my gosh. I know I only asked for half an hour. I need more time. Rita, do you have more time?
I have more time.
Okay, let's get to this book because it's, your life is fascinating, and I just got maybe carried away. I'm sorry, but I think it's important too for listeners to understand your background and where you come from. Saints and soldiers inside internet age terrorism, from Syria to the Capitol siege. So much that you've written and can discuss. I'm really, and have been for a long time, interested in issues around terrorism. I think I've interviewed most prominent terrorism experts in the country, but I've always been fascinated by what's happening here in the U.S. And I think ever since 95, the Oklahoma City bombing, with what Timothy McVeigh did, obviously. When I got into media and covering politics, I remember covering the controversy over the Department of Homeland Security during the Obama administration when Janet Napolitano was the leader, and they put out a document, an investigation that there was some concern about veterans, people who had served in combat in Iraq and otherwise, coming home and becoming radicalized. And they got all kinds of trouble, and I think she had to walk that back because it was politically incorrect, to say the least, to talk about the issue, the concern, the threat that some Americans posed. At this point, there's far less controversy, I think, to some extent about it in terms of more and more people realize the threat because we've seen so many terrorist attacks, domestic terrorist attacks. But let's get into it, because how do you see how domestic terrorism has grown? And I mean, I kind of want to start at Timothy McVeigh. Maybe you want to go further back with the Clinton administration and Ruby Ridge or something and Janet Reno. But I think about what's happened in our country from the early 90s all the way up through now. And you talk a lot about that domestic terrorism in your book. So what is the timeline that you look at, and how have things changed here?
So we cover the fact that I was working on jihadist terrorism. Right. Al-Qaeda and then ISIS. And then when ISIS started growing, 2014, the domestic threat started growing into a whole new phenomenon. And that happened when Obama was elected. That's when I start my book with, I meet with government agents, and one of the questions that they ask me, we talk about the current situation, about how you could see threats against minorities and racism growing because of the new president. And they ask me, would you like to start maybe doing what you do for the jihadists, which is very great, to mimic it to the domestic threat.
Right.
And, it was a big question that I faced because it would require a whole new infrastructure in the company, right? You have to do so much more. And we were struggling at that time. But really when this threat started is, I would say, that time. But I describe how the real attack that led to what we're seeing today is documented with Bauer's attack in Pittsburgh in October 2018.
At the synagogue,
the
synagogue in Pittsburgh.
Life synagogue.
Yes, and his name, you mentioned his name. I won't even say his name. I don't say their names, but his name is Bowers. This is his last name. In Pittsburgh, in the synagogue. Go ahead.
That attack served as a whole turning point within the domestic threat, because when he went to carry out his attack, he basically represented a whole new generation or thought that was very much the quiet sound at that time. He went to carry out the attack because he said that the organization is sponsoring immigrants, refugees.
Yeah.
And he felt that the white genocide theory is part of it.
Right.
But he said something very important. He said, I'm going in, screw your optics, I'm going in. That screw your optics became a symbol of the whole new terrorist generation that eventually evolved to what I call far right 2.0 and ended up with the Capitol siege riots. And the book, I describe pretty much how the evolution of that attack happened. When Bowers carried out his attack, we were already very much into monitoring domestic terrorism. But what we saw then was something very different. Mimics graphics, memes, slogans, screw your optics, I'm going in, or just do it, was all over the platforms. And what it represented was the optic, meaning he said, I don't care anymore about the old optics. That was very prominent.
Oh, well, somebody else wanted to join our interview. I think it was Siri. It was your watch? Yes, my watch jumps in at some of the most inopportune times, but I don't want to go off on too far of a tangent to make people laugh. But I think they know what I'm talking about. So the theory...
It's gone.
What happened? I mean, go ahead. Bowers...
So the theory before, until then, was we have to maintain the political connection. We have to continue fighting, but we'll fight for it through political means. We're not going to be carrying out attacks, because attacks will basically take us down. But there was very strong, and you could see that at that time, that people couldn't take it anymore. And he represented that generation, that theory, or that thought that without attacks, you're not going to be achieving any results. And in many ways, what he did and the way he said it, it really represented the break of ISIS from Al-Qaeda. For me, it was, oh my God, we're seeing here the exact same thing, because what ISIS did is they went after Al-Qaeda. The Al-Qaeda said, we're not going to do anything crazy, not taking over territories in the West. We're just going to take it easy. And ISIS is like, we're not going to do that. We have to go. And so in that, and look how quickly ISIS was able to grow in no time. Yeah. And after Bowers, what happened is we saw the New Zealand attack. Tarrant, you don't want to say names, Tarrant in New Zealand happened 6 months later. He basically called his file, screw your optic. And that was huge.
So the New Zealand massacre shooter was inspired or somehow connected to the Pittsburgh synagogue shooter in terms of...
Not connected,
but he inspired by using the same...
He followed his path. Yes, with screw your optics. That's the name of the file. And his manifesto was all about the white replacement and other theories. But few weeks later, in May 2019, a third attack happened. And that was the Chabad house in San Diego by John Ernest. And he called his file the same. And he said, Bowers and Tarrant inspired me. And that started a whole chain of reactions, of attacks, one after the other, not acknowledging each other's contribution to this attack.
That, I think, is the most probably important thread here, and you write about that. You could also talk about the horrible massacre in Norway and what his manifesto and how that inspired. I feel like he is one of the leading inspirations for many of these others. But what you're saying is that they inspire and motivate each other. And you also talk about the Charleston church shooter, the young white man who attacked and killed, I think it was 9 Black parishioners in their church, in their sanctuary, another, similar to the synagogue in their sanctuary. Then you also talk about what happened in Buffalo at a grocery store. And we could go on and on. We could talk about El Paso, I think at the Walmart where Hispanic
El Paso was right after that. Yes. And there were several others, but you might ask the question, how come that Breivik in Norway that happened years before and other attacks didn't really cause this whole revolution within the far-right community, like what happened after Bowers, like what happened after Tarrant. Tarrant, I called it the 9/11 of the far-right, because when Tarrant happened, it was, what you saw online was something that cannot be imagined. Entire staff in my company, didn't matter what hat you were wearing, let's say from the IT department to the jihadist department, they all had to basically just review and monitor the far right, because you could never see something like that. And really what the reason we're seeing what we're seeing today is, what is this whole book about? Is that this is a whole new kind of terrorism. This is not the typical terrorism that we are used to see. In the past, I had to actually be somewhere to record, to understand, to learn about, and identify. Today, everything happens on the internet. But yes, you might say, but everybody used the internet forever. Hamas used the internet, Palestinian Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah, the Ku Klux Klan used the internet, but they used it as a mean, as a tool. They used it as promote events, fundraising, coordination, recruitment in general. Here, join us in this and that date. But today, terrorist organizations are born on the internet, live on the internet. And in order to fight them, you have to fight them on the internet. It's a whole new concept where ideology is not the major role, not major cause for terrorism, but it's something else.
What is that something else? Is it solidarity, loneliness, somebody having a similar interest in this case? You know, because a lot of these things that these communities that are created by the internet are amazing and harmless and beautiful and wonderful. But in this case, these communities are horrible and dangerous and filled with mostly young men. I think it's fair to say, and they. Part of it is this kind of solidarity, this loneliness that they have, and then they meet up online and they feel like they're not alone anymore. What is the something else? Is that it?
And let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
When ISIS was rising and it was all over social media, you heard the stories about girls from the UK that left everything behind.
Yeah.
Teenagers.
Yeah.
You heard the same stories in the United States. One of the cases that I investigated and was published everywhere is the 3 Colorado girls that suddenly left one day and trying to join ISIS, and luckily they were stopped before they arrived there. And they were the ages of about 15, 16, and 17. How much ideology did these girls have about ISIS? How much did they know about them? These girls were part of a family that they loved, and within 6 months they changed everything immediately. And that was because of social media. That was because of the internet. That was culture. It was a new culture for them where ISIS was promoting this idea as a cool thing to do. You join us, you get here a Muslim country, you get here to marry, there's anything you can. And the same thing happened with the far right. It's the culture, it's the memes, it's the community that welcomes everyone. Just like you said, it's those that don't fit in the community, the lonely people. It's from the incels to those that can't fit anywhere. And they are welcoming everyone. Everyone is important. And how did ISIS do it really well? One example is when individuals carried out attacks in the US, in France, and other locations, and they were not really part of ISIS. They called them soldiers of the caliphate. And what did the far right do when Bauer carried out his attack? He was named as a saint. And the saint of the saints is Tarrant from New Zealand, and so on. And Ernest is a saint, and the Buffalo Shooter is a saint. And those titles and the cultures that surrounds that, where we welcome all of you. And I blame on this the internet platforms that allow these communities to thrive. And the problem we have is that while ISIS was fought and is now very hard to be found online, and we can see that the decrease of attacks all over the world from the ISIS side. But on the far right community, the privilege that they have online has never been seen before, with dedicated platforms, with millions of visitors on a monthly basis. And so that attracts all of those that really are looking can't fit anywhere else.
Talk to me about the one detail or community or characteristic of you mentioned incel. But misogyny, what role does that play? I've never really done a deep dive into trying to understand the young men who are categorized this way. And I don't know that they categorize themselves as much this way, or if they find each other. but how much of an ingredient, how similar, by the way, is this to foreign terrorist groups, jihadists, etc.? This incel misogyny ingredient. What's going on here in the U.S. and how similar is it to the philosophies of ISIS?
It's funny. I have a whole chapter about it. The similarities of how sex.
That's why I asked you, Rita.
How sex attracts terrorism.
Yeah.
And I describe, for instance, forget about what I described, but let's talk about this. It is fascinating. I was fascinated to see how ISIS was recruiting men, right?
Yeah.
I already said that ideology doesn't play a role. And here's a perfect example. You go on Twitter and you see one of the ISIS recruiters in English says, come join us. You can get 4 women. And he's pictured with his four women, like with an image of 4 women behind him. Of course, that they're all fully disguised. You can't see anything except for their eyes. And that was one of the selling points to many men in the West, because as it becomes more and more difficult today to get women, because women have their own ability to say no, many men become more frustrated about it. And so that was the fact that something like that was a selling point. And then they tell them on Twitter, and if you want, you can also have a lot of slaves that will be, with you whenever you want. And the fact is that people moved there and shared their experiences about all of that. And I give a lot of these examples, but the same thing happens with the far right. And one of the things I say is probably the more you take, the more rights you give to one community, it oftentimes it will frustrate other communities.
Sure.
So
Yes.
the more women are becoming more, leading in the community, have the rights to say and do whatever they want, and they have the right to say no, many more become frustrated. And that community, the far right community, really capitalized on everything that is happening with the Me Too movement, and capturing more and more people that were not really far right, but became frustrated of this whole new phenomena. When you look at the recruitment of the traditional far right and pictures of women and by the way, my book has a lot of images also, because I feel like this is really part of the culture of current terrorism.
Yeah.
The ideal woman is a woman that obeys her husband, that cooks and clean and raise the kids. And you have to see their dressing. It has to be fully covered with the traditional dresses. I'm looking at this. How is this different than what the ISIS woman is supposed to be? It is, and that's part of what we're seeing today. I mean, if you look at where we stand today, the threat of terrorism today is not limited to Al-Qaeda or ISIS. Today, I find myself doing things that I could have never imagined that I will actually be doing, including monitoring caravans of trucks that are blocking roads.
Right.
What? Why am I even doing that? Because there's a group called QAnon. And maybe ask me about QAnon, because I think that the QAnon movement is, you replace the name Al-Qaeda or ISIS with QAnon, and it's very much the same, because QAnon is today really one of the most examples of what is terrorism today. Because what is terrorism today is internet. I said it's born on the internet. Now look at QAnon. A lot of important people pledged to QAnon, including General Flynn. He pledged to Q.
Yep.
Who's Q? Who's Q?
Well, nobody knows.
Who did he actually pledge to?
Yeah. I mean,
it's an internet character. It's an internet character. What else? You don't know who Q is. Yeah. Where's Q? Where's the headquarters of this group?
Yeah.
Where is it? It's on the internet. Who runs it? Nobody knows. But millions of people pledge to Q.
I wonder though about, I really wanted to get to this. I'm glad you brought us to QAnon and to this point, because these religiously influenced terrorist groups that you've studied and understand so well, specifically ISIS and Al-Qaeda, give them more credence in terms of what they believe, because they're religious fundamentalists, which we've had throughout the human history, and often they've been militarized and obviously have caused all kinds of terrorist attacks. But what they believe is this version of their religion. We could go deeper into that.
Agree.
But I feel like these QAnon people, and for lack of a better, and I don't worry about it being insulting, I don't want to turn people off, but the beliefs that they have, they're dumb. They're not like the ISIS beliefs, which are rooted in history and some kind of manipulated version or interpretation of the religion. And by the way, every religion, if you read their holy texts, they're pretty brutal and violent. So if you want to lift and cherry pick, you can. But at least you're talking about things that were actually said or partially believed or twisted. In this case, Rita, I don't get it. These people believing, for example, that JFK Jr. is alive. I don't see a parallel with ISIS or Al-Qaeda with some of these beliefs. This just seems like idiotic, stupid. It's not rooted in anything. It's just somebody made this shit up on the internet and people are buying it to the point that they are dedicating their lives to it. And I feel like there's not a parallel here with Americans who believe in this really crazy, bizarre stuff, because there's no historical reference or religious fundamentalism. What am I missing?
You're not missing anything, except for I think that ISIS is very similar to Q, because today ISIS does not have ideology. ISIS is about kill everyone, and it's a bunch of people that really want to control the world as much as they can. There's no ideology. Ideology existed with terrorist organizations where Hamas, for instance.
Well, hold on a second. Let me push you on that. You're the expert. ISIS basically wanted to create a religious state called a caliphate, which is throughout the Quran, if I'm not mistaken. The caliphate is not new.
Yes, the idea of the caliphate is not new, and they basically capitalized on that idea. It's a group that started with Zarqawi,
right?
And they broke out from Al-Qaeda. But look what they did. Everything that they did is, I wouldn't say that any Muslim will actually support what they did. It's not religious. They didn't, the religious, that doctrine that they adopted is made by them. Going and killing every Muslim that says no, right, or reject that, it's not. It's, if anything, it's very similar to the mass shooters that we're seeing today, that they just go and kill whoever they want because for the sake of killing. Part of that, and I explain that these killings have a reason, and that to create more continuation, every attack will lead to another attack. But let's go to QAnon, because it's a fascinating case. And again, I do compare QAnon to ISIS because you have still a lot of people that pledge to ISIS leader. Nobody knows who ISIS leader is since Baghdadi was killed. Several other ISIS leaders were killed. Nobody knows who they are. It's an online identity as of now. It probably exists somewhere, but they don't care. And QAnon is even worse than that, because QAnon, the Q, nobody knows who he is.
Well,
and
he's probably a lot of people.
It's to the people, and people are believing in it. For me, in the past, when I had to investigate Al-Qaeda after 9/11, which was a real changing point in the United States history and the rest of the world, I would say, affected everyone. It was about really studying and understanding where the new threat is coming from. Who is the next attacker? You realize that there is a group that wants to kill people. But look at what's happening today. Today, your brother-in-law or your sister might be suddenly recruited to become Q, and there's no more connection. Families were basically broken apart because of Q. But what is Q? It is an online infrastructure. Somebody is manipulating communities. And the sad thing is that these communities continue to grow. And this is the growth from starting far right, and the Q eventually merged when they were all on the same platform, like 8chan, and became one block that headed to January 6th, and you could see that, and that's what we were threatening about for a long time.
That's what you, hold on. I think you misspoke. That's what your organization, I think this is a really key point, was warning. You said threatening. Your organization.
I said threatening about the new threat.
You were warning about the threat that these people pose for a long time. And I think that's a really important key point I just want to underscore, because we heard so many people, and I mean mainstream journalists, much less government, national security types, said, we didn't see this coming. And I saw it coming from my shed in Rockland County because I follow the organization, because I follow the investigative journalists who for a living cover, like Ben Collins and others at NBC and other mainstream outlets that cover these extremist movements. And it's just so frustrating to me because I'm like, we did see this coming. If you were paying attention, of course we saw it coming. Is that what you're saying?
It was very much. We were reporting, look, we have government clients, many government clients. And we have been reporting long before January 6th for about 2 months what's going to happen on January 6th. Yes. Because, there's no doubt that Trump led January 6th. But the community that was created was a community that was created throughout the years since Bauer's attack, and it continued to grow to a huge block, what I call far right 2.0. We sent, on the day of January 6th or the following day, Wall Street Journal said the site intelligence group covered at least 24 of dispatches warning to the government about what's going to happen. It was clear. And that is, again, we didn't need to dig very deep. You could see it happening. Yeah. You could see the coordination on these forms from Telegram to the Donald to the Perler and Gab, this huge infrastructure with millions of people attending it daily. The zip tiles, the surrounding Congress, kidnapping officials, and etc. It was all there. Yeah,
Michigan. It's so important that people don't forget that the Michigan State House riot and the plot to kidnap the freaking governor and then apparently rape her and murder her family and all this stuff. I mean, that happened before January 6th. I mean, you didn't have to be paying close attention. So, all right, well, listen, there's so much more to talk about, but I know I've got to let you go. And so I just want to end on the idea, the ideas that you talk about domestic terrorism being preventable. Rita, what do your organization, government organizations, media organizations need to do? And the other question I'd love to slip in there maybe before that is, you're talking about the kind of the dark web and the things that happen in all kinds of different spaces on the internet. But I feel like the biggest dangers, and I'll just name two at the top, are two people in mainstream. Well, one in certainly mainstream corporate media, that would be Tucker Carlson, and the other who's been deplatformed over and over, but is hugely prominent, is Alex Jones. These guys are mainstream, and I wonder what we do, if anything, about the theories they're preventing or giving in corporate media and mainstream media, even if they've been deplatformed, versus what you're seeing in the dark web. And then maybe you can get to some of the policy solutions, ideas that we need to undertake, or at least certainly talk about how to prevent this domestic terrorism.
So first of all, it's not the dark web. That's the main problem that we're seeing today. Okay. ISIS needs to hide on applications. The far right are also in some applications. Telegram is very popular. But the problem is that they can have websites. They can have social media companies. It's this like social media, whether it's Getter, which is like Twitter, or Gab, or Truth Social, or many others. These platforms recruit and brainwash millions of people. When you join them, after Bauer's attack, I wrote an article for Politico about Gab, and I said this website has to be shut down because you see the crazy ideas of people want to carry out attacks. Bauer's was one of them. He basically was threatening about killing Jews for a long time. And I said, when you put people in non-moderated websites or platforms, when they are not moderated, people become more and more radical. So when they are on mainstream social media and they were kicked out, that's because they were very radical. But when you put radical people with more radical people,
Right.
it's going to become very dangerous. And so, first of all, what must happen is fight this new phenomena, understanding the new kind of terrorism. This terrorism is born on the internet, will be defeated on the internet by the internet companies. You killing and arresting is important, but that's not going to be defeating anything, because on a daily basis, you have thousands of new people joining these communities.
And this is true around the world of these extremist organizations.
It's all over the world. But the problem is, Pete, is that there's no freedom of speech in other countries.
That's what I was going to say. In America, we have the First Amendment. And so
these websites operate from the United States, are provided platforms by Silicon Valley. And so as long as we want take the Silicon Valley countries, and please, anyone who has any connection, I say that this war is really a war that can be fought by any one of them, because any one of us, because right now, any person can be a threat. Today, threats against doctors, nurses, hospitals, and you just name it. And it's growing and more. Yeah. So in order to fight this war, you have to shut them up. There is no other solution. And ICT sector is the most important. And you ask why the government cannot do a lot. They are doing a lot, more than I've ever remembered. My first book was Criticism and Indictment to the FBI. Today, and other government agencies, today, I see how in many cases their hands are tied, because if somebody says, I want to kill someone, unless there's specifics, they can't start an investigation.
Right. So
freedom of speech.
But the government can't shut down a website. But
the ICT companies, it's the role where Perler went down. Yeah. It's because Amazon finally, after January 6th, agreed to take them down. Why didn't take it down earlier? Look, almost every company, including Cloudflare, Amazon, any company that provides services has its own rules and conditions that you have to sign up for, right? Yeah. You have to sign any of these. They need to enforce them. If they enforce their own rules and conditions, they have a good reason to take down a website, because almost I can, in my book, I have the quotes. I don't have them right in front of me, but Cloudflare and Amazon have their own. If the website, we have the right to take down any website, any server, if they're inciting for terrorism or violence. Gab, Truth Social, and others, they are not inciting for terrorism.
Listen, everybody wants to talk to you. I hear your phone ringing. You got to jump, I'm sure. You have to go?
If you want,
Well, I just had one final question about the solution there, which is, in terms of domestic terrorism. And my question, this is, I think, the kind of most challenging one for people to, but you would know as much as anybody. How concerned are you about the QAnon, the far right extremists and whatever, actually being inside the House, being in the FBI, being in law enforcement, local and state and federal? When we talk about domestic terrorism, we have to consider this issue, being in the military. How that seems to be a real problem. You can fit in. You're just a white man with an ideology, or any other color. Frankly, you're an American. You work as a police officer or FBI or DHS or anywhere else. How concerned are you about that there are actually active folks inside law enforcement who's supposed to be protecting us?
I think you had a show about the Oath Keepers, and you covered a lot of people in the military that have been infiltrated the military, and they are far right. And we have done a lot of studies like that. That's the main problem that we have currently in this country, is that when I looked into Al Qaeda or ISIS, it's not, I used to say, I'm not scared. I'm not scared, because I don't think that these people will be able to reach me and kill me. I describe in my book about a real threat that I received along with our consultant, and how serious I was about that threat. Look, I live in this country for more than 20 years, and to date, I have not, now in recent years, I don't dare to put a mezuzah. My parents in Iraq had a mezuzah.
Right.
I don't put a mezuzah because the situation today is just getting worse and worse. And if the ICT companies, the major ICT sector, will not get involved as they did with ISIS, with the far right, not giving the far right the privilege of the continuous recruitment, brainwashing, believing in fake news, this is just going to get worse.
I so highly recommend your book and site, the organization, Saints and Soldiers Inside Internet Age Terrorism from Syria to Capital Siege. And in case anybody's wondering, the mezuzah is the little thing that Jewish people often put outside their doorway, signifying that there's a Jewish person living here. And the history of that is, if you don't know about it, look it up, because it's a really sad thing to hear you say. But I understand the concern there. And it seems like we step back a few hundred years sometimes. Rita, a pleasure to have you joining me, and congratulations on the book. Please keep up the good work, and please join me again. Let's do part 2 soon.
Thank you very much. Thank you. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Rita Katz, everybody. What did you think of our conversation? I'd love to hear from you again. The book is Saints and Soldiers Inside Internet Age Terrorism from Syria to the Capital Siege. I was very happy to have Rita joining me here, and I hope that you will go follow her on Twitter and add her on Facebook and all the places, and let her know that you heard her here on Stand Up. Hope you appreciated today's episode. Of course, I put a lot into it as always, and I would love to hear from you. standuppwithpete@gmail.com, and please subscribe and support the podcast for as little as $5. Thank you to those of you who have edited your pledge up, because you can always pay more. You can go right now on patreon.com/PeteDominic and pay more if you think you're getting more out of it than the $5. I'm certainly putting a lot into it. I'll be in Nyack this Saturday, by the way, with J.L. Covan and comedian Andy Pitts. We're doing a fundraiser for my Democratic Party here locally, the Clarkstown Democrats. And if anybody lives in or around Nyack, New York, right there in the Hudson River near where I live, in Clarkstown, New York, I would love to hear from you and meet you and have you come to our fundraiser. That's all I've got for you today. I will talk to you tomorrow. Be the change you want to see in the world. Do your best to find joy and alleviate suffering. Reach out, connect, get in nature, get some exercise, buy a puppy, eat healthy things, pursue an art, dance, look at the sky and smile. Do whatever you got to do to make it through. I'd love to hear from you. I'll talk to you hopefully tonight at the Hangout, and definitely tomorrow right here on Stand Up. John Carroll, take us out, brother.
Stand up, stand up. Show your face of every color, yellow, black, red, and brown. She's the place where every lost child will finally be found. There's only one thing to do before we stand our ground, and that's stand up, stand up. Well, the founding fathers saw a land for all. They had to stand up, they had to stand up. They had a keen imagination for a crystal ball, drawing all the plans of stand up. But all they had to go on was the time they were in, with other causes for laws, and since they weren't even sin, they knew that change was gonna come before the change could begin. They had to stand up. All right, they had to stand up. We got to stand up. We got to look the devil square in the eye. We gotta let him know it's his time to go, and make it clear when all we hear is a lie. Why you lying awake wondering where the money all went? It'll be the cost of freedom that'll go unspent. You can see him flee the scene of that experiment if you stand up. All right, we got to speak up. We got to reach up and raise your voice in every way you know how. Don't be toes up. You got to show up. Ain't no better time to do it but now. No need to pledge allegiance to no wanton tribe. Rise up, show obedience to the voice inside, and listen well and it'll tell you not to run and hide. It says stand up.